Disrupting Japan, Episode 56. Welcome to Disrupting Japan, straight talk from Japan's most successful entrepreneurs. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for joining me. Aerospace in Japan is particularly resistant to disruption. Over the past decade, the rest of the world has seen incredible gains in both launch vehicles and spacecraft, but Japan has been moving slowly. Sometimes it seems as if she's determined to stay the course with the same government contracts going to much the same corporate heavyweights year after year. Naomi Kurahara of InfoStellar once had plans of changing the Japanese aerospace industry, but along the way, she went out on her own with a plan that bypassed Japan's major players and targeted the global market. You see, when an organization launches a satellite, they usually also build an antenna and a ground station to communicate with that satellite. The problem is that as the satellite orbits the Earth, it's only in communications range of the ground station for less than an hour a day. The rest of the time, the ground station just sits there. Now, before I tell you what Naomi decided to do about that, I want to introduce you to someone. I want to tell you about Justa. Now, I've known these guys for years, and I've been recommending them long before they became a sponsor. Justa is really the only recruiting site that gets bilingual startups. Whether you're looking for American engineers or Japanese sales staff or the other way around, Justa can help you out. Unlike recruiting companies, they're priced to be very startup-friendly, and unlike job boards, they're an active part of the startup community here, and they're trusted by some of the best talent Japan has to offer. So drop by justa.io and see what they're about. So, Naomi decided to pool all of the unused ground station time together and rent it out to satellite operators, Airbnb style. Everybody wins by sharing resources. The ground station operators get income by renting out their facilities, and the satellite operators get to communicate with their satellites far more often. But Naomi explains it better than I can, so let's get right to the interview.
Cheers.
Cheers. So I'm sitting here with Naomi Kurahara, the CEO and fearless founder of InfoStellar. So thanks for sitting down with me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, InfoStellar is basically time sharing for satellite ground station or Airbnb for satellites, but it's a complex idea. So why don't you explain a little bit about what InfoStellar does?
Okay, reason I started this business is the current space business has an issue for cost. Like satellite is expensive and rocket is expensive and also the ground system is expensive because maybe not many people using.
Well, aerospace is incredibly expensive.
Yes.
But actually, I think before we get into InfoStellar's business model, I think it's going to be best if you explain what ground stations are and how they work.
Okay. So there is a three main components for space business: the satellite or spacecraft, and the rocket, which deliver the spacecraft from ground to space. And after the delivery, the operator has to control the spacecraft somehow, because most of the spacecraft doesn't have people on on board, except of space station or maybe except of only space station. But most of the spacecraft doesn't have an operator, so the ground operator has to control the spacecraft. To control, so we need to send some commands. To do that, we use radio and radio communication. So the antenna system and some computer to process the commands.
So the ground stations are they're what's around the big parabolic antennas
Yes.
that everyone's used to seeing on the ground.
Yeah.
And they both get data from the satellite?
And to the satellite.
And give instructions
Yes.
back to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that that's clear, tell us about InfoStellar's business.
Yeah. So go back to the issue of the space business, the cost. Because the cost is so expensive, space business is difficult to launch or start. And then for ground side, one ground station, including one dish antenna, maybe it costs about at least $200,000.
Okay.
Yeah. So to reduce the service price, there is only one way to reduce the cost, which is to increase the usage.
So increase the usage of the ground stations.
Yes. Yes. If only one person use, maybe the 1% or 2% of the whole time is used.
So InfoStellar allows the sharing of these ground stations.
Yes.
Right? So traditionally, if I'm putting up a satellite, so I build my satellite, I pay someone to launch it into orbit for me.
Yeah.
And do I usually build a dedicated ground station to track that satellite?
I say yes, because most of the satellite or government require to stop the satellite anytime.
Okay.
Makes sense. So to do that, many operator has to have one ground station at least.
All right. Now, how much downtime does a ground station have? So if I've launched my satellite and I've got my ground station, in one day, how many minutes or how many hours are that ground station and that satellite communicating?
So it depends on the location. And for Japan, I can get only 30 minutes per day for communication time.
30 minutes per day. So 23 hours and 30 minutes is just not being used.
Yes, right.
Okay. And that's the time that InfoStellar wants to rent out and to share.
Yes. So to reduce the cost, I want to make the usage higher. I don't know. Yeah. So
that makes sense, renting out that unused capacity.
Yes.
Now, I don't imagine that all ground stations are the same. They must have different frequencies and different ways of communicating with the satellites. How does InfoStellar work with that?
Well, all satellite has different, but still I can categorize some satellite because for frequency there is a allocation for satellites. For example, there is a band called X band. It's about 8 gigahertz. So for satellites can use 8 to 8.4 gigahertz. And the other X band satellite cannot use.
Okay, so it is fairly standardized.
Yes.
All right. The protocol used to communicate between a ground station and a satellite must be completely different for every satellite. So how does it work?
Well, that's the problem. The many satellites has own protocol or option. So I have to make sure that every station can process the many satellites.
Okay. But I'd imagine the stations themselves, they don't have to understand the data they're getting, right? They just have to collect it and send it into the cloud and I guess get it to where it wants to go.
Yes, correct. I have to think about the analog side and the digital side. Or analog signal or digital signal. For antenna, take care of the analog. And for analog, it's more easier. Like many satellites can be categorized or they have a standard frequencies.
Well, it sounds like there's enough standardization so you can at least attack the problem.
Yes.
So For any multi-sided marketplace, you've got the supply side and the demand side, and the biggest challenge is always getting both sides on board together. So let's first talk about the supply side. Have you been able to get a good collection of ground stations signed up for this service?
Okay, we talked the dish antenna, but also I need to have another type of antenna called Yagi antenna. Okay. The antenna looks like fishbone on the buildings or on the houses.
Right.
That's called Yagi antenna. So that types of antenna can receive or can transmit the UHF or VHF frequencies. It's not VHF or UHF, it's a type of frequency categories.
So who owns the ground stations that are signing up?
So for Yagi antenna, the amateur radio person, individual person have. And for dish antenna, mainly private company or sometimes university has.
All right. You've gotten ground stations throughout Southeast Asia on board.
Yes.
Okay. And how did you make those sales? How did you convince people to join this?
Yeah. Well, for people who has antennas, the people usually have own satellite because to operate their satellites, they got their antennas or they got their ground station.
Okay.
So they have the same issue. They got antenna ground station, but the usage is about 30 minutes to 1 hour per day.
I see. So I guess on the supply side, it's an easier case because they're not using it for 23 hours a day.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so it's very appealing to them.
Yes. They have an issue, maintenance cost issue. Sometimes the Yagi antenna require maintenance to change devices or get some new functions. So they still need maintenance. And maybe 5,000 to 10,000 per year.
So $5,000 to $10,000 per year for maintenance cost?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not big, but it's still cost.
Sure, it makes sense. If they can get a little bit of income to pay for the maintenance, it's a great idea for them.
Yeah.
That makes sense on the supply side. So let's talk about the demand side. I'm curious, how big is this market? How big is the market in sort of ground station sharing?
Well, that's biggest question for me too.
Okay.
Because I can count for current market. I can list up the current spacecraft service providers, and I can count their revenue or like funding for a year.
Well, yeah. I mean,
but
when you look at the overall market, right? I mean, but most of the market you can't sell to. So, for example, the military, you can't sell to them. They've got their own ground stations and such.
Private, for example, U.S. private company for using satellite image, they are selling data to private and government, militaries also.
But would, for example, do you think the military or a large government organization would rent ground station time from an individual or a university?
Well, I think military just get data from this data provider.
Okay.
And they don't care that data came from which ground station.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess maybe it is bigger than I was thinking.
Yes. And for our business, the current market is still not enough, I am thinking. And I believe the market will increase very quickly, and it's getting bigger than current size.
There really does seem to be this huge amount of innovation right now in aerospace.
Yes.
And the cost of launching a satellite and the cost of building a satellite seems to have dropped like 90% over the last 5 or 6 years.
Correct.
which is just incredible growth all of a sudden.
Yes.
So I guess you're counting on that growth and these new industries to make up the bulk of your clients in the years to come.
Right.
That makes sense.
The 30 or maybe 20 years ago, we never expect we use smartphone or tablet for business and for daily life. We never expect Google Earth or Google Map is such a strong tool.
That's true, and now it's just part of our everyday life.
Yes.
We don't think about it.
Yes.
Where do you think the growth will come from? What industries do you think are going to be using these new, cheaper satellites?
Well, it's also a difficult question. For example, the many business say smart city or big data, or for example, the Google is trying to do unmanned driving system.
Yeah, the Google's driverless cars.
That system require the car, of course, but not only for that, they need a map information and sensing information and maybe GPS information.
Right, they've announced they're launching a satellite array of like 1,200 satellites, some huge number of satellites.
Yes, right. So something that captured in space that can be combined to the other industry. So that's kind of combined or cross-industry service.
Okay.
Yes. I think that makes that increase.
So we'll see a lot of different companies taking advantage of sensor data.
Yes.
You're probably right. I mean, so maybe 20 years from now, there'll be some obvious application that we're not imagining right here in this room.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like imagine now Google Maps shows just a picture.
Right.
But if the picture is updated real time, what's happened?
Right.
Or if you have temperature data for all over the world.
Right, and I guess since the satellites are up there, it's much cheaper to rent additional ground stations than to launch another satellite. That makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about you for a minute.
Okay.
Because you're sort of a non-typical founder in Japan.
What do you mean not
Well, it's you got your PhD in electrical engineering at Kyushu Institute of Technology, right? Then you were a researcher at University of Tokyo for a few years. And I think InfoStellar was actually based on a research paper you published, wasn't it?
Yes. But the concept itself was not from me. It existed more than 10 years.
Okay. So when you decided to leave your university job and found this company, were there university or government programs that helped you out? Were there mentors and advisors, or did you just make the jump on your own?
I just jumped on.
You just jumped on your own? Really? That's a pretty big jump.
Well, between university and InfoStellar, I was in the private company also. So it's not big jump, maybe.
What made you finally decide to leave your job and start the company?
Well, when I was in university, I wanted to become astronaut, or I wanted to work in bigger, major satellite company. But during postdoc in University of Tokyo and during I was joining the private company, it was different. I mean, it is not something I expected.
Oh, how was it different?
Well, the job itself was very excited. I enjoyed a lot. But I thought some new spacecraft, a new space business or a new space company or space industry cannot be created or cannot be born in older
Okay. So
space.
even though aerospace is very high tech, it just didn't seem like you were working on new things?
Well, of course, technology, they are doing very high tech things about space, but they cannot change the world or they cannot change industry.
So they were making small incremental improvements. They're not making disruptive change.
Yes, like they do step by step, but they cannot be a Microsoft or Apple or Google.
Yeah. Well, especially in Japan, aerospace you're basically selling to the government.
Right.
It's a lot like working for the government.
Right. I hope nobody, JAXA or big company related people is listening to this.
Oh, I think they would probably agree with you.
Okay.
I don't think that's a big secret. Well, let me ask you a little bit of a personal question, because after your PhD and your postdoc work at the University of Tokyo, you were on a really good career path, and then you left to start your own startup. Was your family supportive of that, or what did they think?
It was tough to tell them I left
Really?
a company or I leave universities.
Uh-oh.
Well, my parents is over 60s. They are typical Japanese. They believe staying in universities or staying in big company is the best way to live in.
Well, it's a very safe way to live.
Safe way, yes. It was difficult to talk with them.
So they were not happy about the idea?
Well, they accepted, but they looks like, okay.
Have they changed their opinion, or are they still hoping you'll go back to a proper job?
Well, they are hoping.
Okay. Well, when you made that change, what was the biggest difference you saw between the academic world and the big company world and the startup world? What was the biggest gap you saw?
Well, for academic, we have goal, and we work for the goal. But if the goal is not achieved, still it's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but no one punish.
Yeah, nobody gets fired.
Yes.
Nobody loses their job.
Right.
That's true. In a startup,
Yeah.
if you miss your goal, your company might be over.
Yes.
Do you find that exciting, or is that just stressful?
I'm exciting.
Okay.
Well, it's stressful.
It's both.
Well, so I think that's a big difference.
Okay. One of the biggest things, like you were telling me before, is you're going to be a mom soon.
Right.
How are you going to balance that? Are you going to sort of put the company on hold for a while?
I cannot do that.
Not an option.
No. Well, maybe I take a week or 2 weeks off. At least I had to check emails and I have to communicate with my team via Skype or internet.
That's going to be really challenging.
I know.
But I understand what you mean. When things are in motion, you can't just stop them.
No, I cannot.
Let me ask you a bigger question about Japan. Prime Minister Abe talks a lot about making Japan more friendly to working moms. Actually, everyone talks about it a lot. If Abe asked your advice on what the government should do to make things better for working moms, what would you tell him?
Well, I really hope government help the working mom or working women, but it is so difficult because I believe the many changes required. Like, I was in the engineering field long time,
Right.
and I'm sorry, but still men, typically older men, has idea something women or mother has to stay home and has to take care of the children.
So there's still a lot of discrimination in technical fields?
Yes, and so the mental change is required.
Let me dig into that for a second. So, for example, in your PhD class and your postdoc, how many women researchers were there?
In my same year,
Yeah.
only me.
Oh, just you? Okay. So we definitely need more.
Yeah. But we don't have much PhD student in my year. Maybe 30 or 40 only. But
Okay.
still.
But still, only one woman is pretty low.
Yeah. And I think the system or social system needs to change, because at least a week or 2 weeks during the delivery.
So guaranteed maternity leave.
Yes, I had to leave at least several periods. But if I am a manager and if I have a very important project and one person leave a few weeks, I may be upset a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard for any business to deal with staff taking time off.
So I understand the manager side thinking, but that's I need or we need something to cover the maternity leave things. I don't know how.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you what I call my magic wand question. And that's if I gave you a magic wand and I said that you could change anything about Japan, the culture, the way of thinking, the education system, anything at all, to make it better for startups, what would you change?
Maybe I change a role. That every student has to take a year off after their graduation, and the government pay during that
year off.
Yeah.
What would they do?
And the student has to go abroad. They cannot stay in Japan.
Interesting. So it could be they could go abroad to study or work or anything?
Anything. But they cannot stay in Japan.
Why is that important?
Well, I think the many Japanese too focusing to Japan. It's nice if everyone look the outside of Japan.
Okay, so it would just give them a more global perspective.
Yes.
And when they went into business, they wouldn't be so focused on the Japanese market and the Japanese way of doing things.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much for sitting down with me today. It's been a great talk.
Thank you so much.
Some of Japan's largest corporations are starting open innovation programs and are actively reaching out to global startups. They're new at this, and that's where CREW, with 2 W's, comes in. CREW runs open innovation programs for companies like Toyota and Panasonic and dozens more. And these programs are one of the best ways to jumpstart your business in Japan. Many are open to global startups, and they're completely free. Now, I know and I work with the CREW team, and they're probably doing more than anyone to bridge the gap between corporate Japan and global startups. So drop by CREW with 2 W's .me/4-startups and get started. And we're back. You know, maybe more than the business itself, I was impressed with Naomi's determination to follow her own path. I mean, it's almost become a cliche about how founders fight the system to follow their dreams. But the hard truth is that most startup founders today aren't fighting the status quo. They're riding high on it. Startup culture is celebrated today. Starting a company is seen as respectable and even admired. Funding is easy to obtain, and once funded, people tend to be supportive of your vision. Talking with people like Naomi, however, reminds us of what it really means to do things on your own terms. From being the only woman in her PhD and postdoc programs, to going against the wishes of her family to start her own company, to running that company as a single mom, she's not so much celebrating doing things her way, she's just doing it. Ground station rental may be a very small market today, but it's one that might see explosive growth in the coming decade, and it looks like InfoStellar is set to grow right along with it. If you've got a love for aerospace and satellites, Naomi and I would love to hear from you. So come by disruptingjapan.com/show056 and let's talk about it. When you drop by, you'll find all the links and sites that Naomi and I talked about and much, much more in the resources section of the posts. And I know you've been meaning to do this for a while now, but when you get the chance, please leave us an honest review on iTunes. It's really the best way you can support the show and help us get the word out. But most of all, thanks for listening. And thank you for letting people interested in Japanese startups know about the show. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for listening to Disrupting Japan.